Hello, and welcome to Plugging Along, a stream dedicated to LOTRO plugins. Last time on Plugging Along, we addressed the last known MinstrelBuff plugin bugs with the German client, for instance, and then looked at the main function that gets called every time the effect list of the player changes to see what other inefficiencies it might have, kind of brainstorming how can we make this better, faster, easier to update, and so on. So this time we're going to continue with that list of possible enhancements for both speed and maintainability. And as always, feel free to jump into chat with your thoughts and questions. They don't even have to be on topic. Real in chat says hello, or hiya, hello to you. Farothan says, hello, finally I'm able to watch the stream live. Well, welcome. I don't recognize your specific Twitch username, but welcome anyway. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pull up my source control application that I use. In this case, I use the program called Fork, which wraps around Git repositories. Thurlor asks a very good question, one that I've been pondering myself. Thurlor asks, how do you evaluate performance of a plugin? And Thurlor, funny that you should ask that. One of the things I've been thinking about is something I think you or another plugin developer mentioned, which is there's a function to get the current time, but within a call to the plugin, an event callback to the plugin, you're always going to get that same value from the game client. And so you need to get another callback in order to get another ping of, hey, time has passed and here's how much has passed. And your progress bar library helper that Linorotter was using seemed like a way that maybe we could say the work we're trying to do is a million iterations of the core loop of this plugin. But we do not want to just do that because then we won't necessarily know how long that took. Or we modify it so that we request an update callback or something after we're done with the work we're trying to do so that we can get a new timestamp to figure out how much time did pass. So those are thoughts that are rattling around in my head. And so if we get to the point where we actually want to test the performance, how much time is this thing taking to run? Those are some thoughts in my head. Is if you can get a new timestamp by getting a new callback from the LOTRO client, then we can rig it up so that we do get a new callback, and we can use that to say, okay, here's an approximation of how much time has passed. Okay. Fairthorn says, my real name is redacted, and we talk to each other on LOTRO interface. Awesome. You're very interested in the optimization process of the plugin. Me too. Now, a caveat, I spend my day job working with languages like C#, and so Lua is a part-time project for me. Now, I was finding some interesting resources at the Lua website. Is it lua.org? I'm going to have to go check now. Lua reference manual. Yeah, lua.org. I was doing some searching for performance things, like what things are problems in Lua. And there were some interesting documents here at lua.org, and Stack Overflow had some ideas on that as well. Thurlor points out, at the most basic level, you look at the frame rate. If a plugin is hugging the CPU, the frame rate will decrease. It's a completely valid way to look at it as well. Now, that feels like a more manual way. I don't know of a plugin way to get the current frame rate, but that's okay. Sometimes any measurement is better than no measurement. That being said, there are some obvious efficiencies we can do. If, for instance, we are calling a function to get a value, and that value is a constant, we don't need to call a function to get the value. We can just use the value. And there are some things that we can do to change the plugin that will make it easier to maintain, even if it doesn't strictly speed up the plugin. And maintenance is a big deal for some of these plugins have been around for a decade or almost 15 years, dating back almost to when the Lua support was first added. So maintainability matters a lot. there's something I think about when I think about adding currencies to Titan Bar. That is not an easy task. Like, it's a straightforward enough task. It's been documented by Duriel, I think it is. But it's not a one and done, like, here's the name of the new thing, done. It's this whole thing where you modify a dozen different files with very similar information. And that lack of maintainability hurts me inside, where my insides are. Every time I do Titan Bar, I was like, oh, this needs a refactoring because there are better ways to make this happen. So not all the changes are for speed of the plugin, but maybe some of them will be. As points out, another performance aspect is checking how much memory your plugin takes and if it grows out of control when doing its function. Now, let me throw that back to you, Baz. Is there an easy way to tell how much memory your function is, your plugin is taking, other than using something like the Windows Task Manager? Let me pull one up here for example. You know, I went into less details, and now it's got way too few details. Yeah, that's a concern I have with my deed tracker plugin, is when it loads all the information for all the deeds in the game, even if you're level 1 and can't actually... Oh, awesome. Thrower says, there's a built-in function to get memory usage. Well, we're going to have to play around with that. Let's see. So the first thing I'm going to play around with is pulling up the LOTRO plugin compendium, because the LOTRO plugin compendium gives us, here there be dragons, which is a fun way to look at what's available in the memory space. All right, dragons. Let's go ahead and install that. Thank you, Aquindel, for giving us that. And we're going to come on in here to plugins and refresh with the little green circle. And here be dragons. Now, I'm only pulling this up because a lot of the in-memory functions are visible here in the global table. Now, I'm not actually seeing a specific thing, so I will have to go to the internet. Oh, you said CollectGarbage is the name. I do see that here. Okay, let's take a look. Lua, collect garbage. Oops. Garbage. Oh, Thurlor pasted a link. Excellent. Well, I appreciate that. It looks like you were going to the same place I was. So we'll go ahead and stick that manual link into chat here. You can call collect garbage. Let's take a look. All right, collect performs a full garbage collection cycle. Stops it, restart, count. Returns the total memory in use by Lua. Lovely. Let's play around with that for a second. I have that wasn't on my radar, but I love it. Let's go ahead and pull up the Visual Studio Code. This is a free tool, assuming you're just using it at home. And with the new LOTRO API extension, it is just delightful. Let me give it a second to think about things here. I'm going to go ahead and open up our to-do file, which has some thoughts from last time. And also, let's open up main.lua. Now, we were looking at the main core loop of the MinstrelBuff plugin, the refresh effect display. So if I stick some stuff in here, I know I can trigger it. Oh my goodness. Maybe that was one window too many. Now my computer is like, wait, I don't know what I'm doing. All right, note to self, open Visual Studio Code before stream next time. Okay. Let it cache all these things. So what does this look like? What does a call of collect garbage look like? The function is generic interface performs different according to its first argument. Okay, so let's do that. CollectGarbage. Oh. Oops. Well, we have information here. What I don't know is what the return value looks like. Returns an any. All right. Returns a total memory in kbytes. All right. Local memory used equals that. And we're going to go ahead and just spit it out. We'll use turbine.shell.writeLine. Memory used. Now this is going to be very spammy. So this is definitely only a diagnostic informational kind of message. Okay. So in a plugin manager, I'm just going to go ahead and unload just to be safe, then reload MinstrelBuffs. Now, the windows always appear in the upper left there. I'm going to go ahead and move them around. Let's see. Thirlor says, one optimization in some of their plugins is to turn off garbage collection during combat. Don't know if it actually has much of an effect. Unless you're creating and deleting a bunch of data constantly, it shouldn't. Yeah, I try to do as little as possible in combat. But, of course, that's where all the exciting plugin stuff happens. Tomasov, I'm not sure what exclamation point command you were attempting to go for, but it didn't show up in my chatty window. Interesting. Baz says, I try to use it to force the garbage collection to remove some target objects that might sometimes linger in case of target switching and such. Also interesting. Actually, that would be very interesting. I will keep going back to dtracker because it has so many problems, but when you switch pages right now, it kind of throws away the old UI for the old page and makes a new one. And that feels like it should be reclaimed at some point. Okay, so we know we're going to be looking for a memory used. So if I go ahead and let's go ahead and switch over to resonance stance. And we can see we have memory used 1.225. 217, 218. Well, that's fascinating that the numbers are going up. It's also a warning to me that I didn't actually create a window that can be seen by everyone. Let's go ahead and create a new tab, pull it off here, and we're going to go ahead and change the filter to be standard and error. No need for event broadcast or regional. All right, and we're going to go ahead and just rename this tab to be plugins. Because those are the two channels that we care about for plugin development. So if I go ahead and use my abilities here a little bit, go ahead and activate. Now what I'm seeing is that the numbers are hovering in the 1220s. Now they started the very first time it activated, it was 1224, and it's been waffling up and down plus or minus 10 since then. So let's go ahead and do that some more. Now, Thurler says, your chat window is occluded. Yes, it was. Thank you. I like having the separate window over here for streaming purposes. It lets me have, people message me and it doesn't immediately come up on stream, but it's kind of in the way when I actually play the game. So I tend to just delete that one and recreate it each stream, and then I forget to do that. I should probably have that on my to-do checklist, but... Okay, so I've just been playing around with the plugin, and we can see we got all the way up to 1232, and then drop back down to 1222. So definitely seems like there's some memory usage, and then some memory cleanup going on the Lua side of things. Now, I'm going to go ahead and take my own advice, add to streaming checklist, open Visual Studio Code ahead of time, let it finish scanning the project workspace, and also recreate plugin tab. There we go. Thurlow recommends /UI layout load streaming. Does that affect the contents of your chat tabs as well? I thought it was just the positions of them. I suppose there's a way to find out. Yeah, Prepman says, too bad you can't save the setting for each tab. That was my experience with UI saving, was that the position of the chat window or windows might be saved, but not the contents, which is very frustrating because I have some very particular desires for my chat windows. Like, I like a single tab for all the kind of global stuff, world and trade and LFF, and I prefer that not to be my general tab. It's a separate tab. I call it world, and then that's just where all of that goes. And then when I'm doing things like chicken session play, I have to redo that at the beginning, or else it just drives me bonkers. And if I'm using Waypoint, I like to have standard in its own chat tab, because Waypoint, one of the side effects of us not being able to query where we are without the /loc command is that it spams the standard chat channel a lot, which is totally fine. But I just split it off into its own tab. Okay, let's go ahead and do one or two more. Okay, we see 19, 21, 23. 35, 22. Okay, so we're seeing a lot of stability in those numbers, and that gives us a sense of where those numbers are right now. I don't think we're going to improve that memory-wise. We might, but we can make a note. So, beginning of stream 2022-04-12, collect garbage. Was that what it was? Yeah. Collect garbage. Returned values between 12:15 and 12:35. So that gives us a starting point. Oh man, I am really curious actually. Hang on. Since I know dtracker is a memory hog. I would have to add the change. Okay, I'll put that later. Okay, so we have some thoughts from last time. The first thing I want to get into is actually, oh man, these are all so good. So just to review what we saw last time, the first thing is in this refresh effect display, and I'm going to get rid of this collect garbage count for right now because we don't need that happening right now. Okay, one of the things that I noticed was we are getting the effect list, and then we are copying off all of those effects and then sorting them by time, and then checking to see which of those effects we care about. And that feels inefficient. It also feels like something where, oh man, I keep waffling on about whether that's something I want to tackle right now, because that involves maybe adding some helpers to buff window, like here are your things and your problem. One of the things about this is that when we're looking at the anthems, we have up to 6 anthems. I did say waffling, the redhead, thank you. We have up to 6 anthems, and if you're not familiar with the MinstrelBuff UI, there is a fixed mode that shows the possible anthems as they were about 10 years ago. The icons are not quite right now, so that is a thing to change. And in that case, all of the anthems just go where they go. For instance, if I do the Anthem of War, and then Anthem of Composure, and then Anthem of the Third Age, they just go in those spots. They always go in those spots. Whereas in the standard mode, they are sorted chronologically. And one of the things the plugin does is sorts all of the effects chronologically, and then checks to see which of those effects we care about, which just feels strange. But you know, I keep wanting to go back to something Thurlow mentioned, which is the way the minstrel effects, and the way I've been thinking about localization for a while, because that's just what I saw other people doing, and it didn't even occur to me to do something different. Minstrel effects has parallel tables, valid ballad effects English, but then also valid ballad effects German, Deutsch, and then valid ballad effects French. And what I would like to do is just have valid ballad effects, and it's just set to be whatever the current language is. And I think that'll make me happiest to do that, because that's actually something I want to kind of practice on here in this smaller environment, and then take with me to a project like DTracker, which will really benefit from the stripping out of that need to check what language are we doing. Now, one thing that I want to do is check in on how we are getting the current language, because I believe it was a very outdated process, and I want to check in on that. Where would that be? Options? No, maybe it's in main. Let's go find out. Where do we have language? Settings. No. All right. Well, we can work back the opposite way. So if we have valid ballad effects here, let's go ahead and find where that's used. And then we can see self get localization is using settings get effect localization names, which is getting self localization. Great. Now, as I said, I don't have a firm grasp of the underpinnings of Lua to know how much function dispatch costs us in overhead in like processor cycles versus just looking in the global table for a value. But those three function calls have got to be at least as expensive as looking up a single value in the global table, right? Like, I don't know. So what I would like to do is look at detect localization. We're using is command. I think that is a thing that we can do. But what am I doing over in something a little bit maybe more modern? Let's go take a look. So I'm going to navigate to where I have saved off some of the other plugins that I normally run with but didn't want to have us distracted with. And let's look at the opaque quest tracker. Okay, so client language is a turbine.engine : get language. I wonder if I can pull this. No, okay. Just realizing I don't know enough about Visual Studio Code to grab this. Thurler says I assume function calls are a constant amount of overhead, thus less concerning than something that increases with number of effects. I just get concerned about like dozens of function calls for a constant every time we're in this function. So let me go ahead and copy in this basic code, and where do we want it? Let's take a look at main here. Constant per frame. All right, so strings comes in fast. That makes sense. We have a message from an old LOTRO player. BOD says, LOTRO, how I loved the played every day for 4 to 5 years, missed a lot. Hope all of you still playing are enjoying your time in Middle Earth. Well, thank you. Thanks for stopping by. Yes, today we're looking at plugins for Lord of the Rings Online, as I do here every week. And if you did not know, maybe we can pop a producer in here. A lot of the Lord of the Rings Online older content is being made available for free for everyone. And so if you were thinking about getting back into Lord of the Rings Online, there's a lot of things you can do in the game without paying any money to Standing Stone Games. Okay, let's go ahead and go into strings. Can I just F12 that? I can. That is delightful. Oh, and we can see here, awesome, that I have incorporated that. So what is this? That is a number. Lovely. I love numbers. Numbers are great. Numbers give us fast comparisons. So we have here client language. I'm debating with myself. So what we can do is we can actually key off of the current language and conditionally import files. And what that would look like is, let's take a look. Thank you, Little Redhead. Starting with the 15th anniversary festival on the 20th. April 20th, yes. Yeah, and as Little Redhead points out, if you haven't logged in and still have your account credentials available, just log in and get credit for having logged in sometime in the last year. It kind of bumps your how many years have you been doing this up by 1, so they say. I haven't actually tried that. Although when I came back to the game about 3 years ago, my account had been steadily ticking up credit over the years. So I had my 11 Zs, for instance. So I don't know how that works under the covers, but theoretically you should log in, and so yeah, do that. All right, so strings. If I make a new file, how do I make a new file in Visual Studio Code? Let's see. Aha, new file. And we're gonna call it strings en.lua. And then first thing I want to do is just if. Actually, I don't need to do it. Maybe I do. So, if client language does not equal en, then return end. Then turbine.shell.writeLine strings en.lua. Exclamation point. That's how excited we are here. But I want to go ahead and do a couple more of these. I want strings underscore de.lua. And it's going to be almost exactly the same. But we're going to go ahead and check for client language equals de. Now, I'm only going to import one of these. But just in case they all get imported for some wacky reason, we just want to stop processing. LOTRO will still have to load and parse the file, but then it can just ignore the contents of the file. All right, and then we're doing strings de.lua. And then one final one, we're going to do strings fr.lua. And same thing in here. If the client language does not equal French, then return. Otherwise, let's just announce that we're doing that. And then finally, I think this works. Let's find out. Is we can say if client language equals en, then import strings en else if client language equals de, then import, oops, just do that, but we're going to do German, and then else if, you know what, we should default to English. That's going to be nicer for us. Equals French, then import. Let's just go ahead and do some pasting here. Else, and then fix that up. So we have French, we have German, we have English. Burlor says, just to play devil's advocate, the reason people usually don't do this way is maintainability. If you have all the languages in the same tree, it's easy to see if something hasn't been translated. It also makes it easier to fall back to English if the German/French isn't known. Absolutely. And full disclosure, I am doing this with the thought that because I have a pre-processing that I have to do for the dtracker plugin that consumes the English, German, and French data files, and then uses the German or French if it's available, otherwise falls back to English, and then spits out a Lua data file. Since I already have that concept mentally as a do this before you release the plugin, then I could definitely see strings.lua here, this being all in one place or something, like a file being all in one place. Then you pre-process it, split out the various ones into each with an English fallback, and that kind of thing. Like that's my mental model here. So quite likely I'm going to do like return before we get to, oh, well, it didn't like that. What's going on here? Oh, end of file. Yeah, I'm very likely going to maybe leave this. I don't know. I would want this all consolidated, yes, for easy maintainability, and then just have a little C# program or something, load it in, split it out, using the German or French if available, otherwise English. So that's a little utility I'm planning on writing that I just haven't gotten to yet. Where you'll be like, here are the 3 files, and or here's the 1 file, and here's the 3 destination, and done. Maybe that'll be an on-stream endeavor, although that is something to work with the Lua parsing for C#. Okay, so ideally what we're going to see here is these conditional importings are only going to, I would like to know when we hit the file and if we parsed it. So, .lua parsed, strings.lua process, maybe. Yeah, let's go with that terminology. That'll help me convince myself that we are, in fact, not even loading these files. Now, that being said, Thurler asked, does deed tracker support French and German? Yes-ish. Here, let me just go ahead and add that in. I keep talking about it. Add that. All right, downloaded, extracted, bam. Okay, so let's go ahead and refresh this and deed tracker. So deed tracker kind of supports in that the data files, I didn't actually have to install that. Deed tracker. So the data files, for instance, deed names to IDs. I have a lookup here that you've completed a thing, a cool reception that is ID whatever. And the German version of that is ein cooler Begrüßung, maybe. So yes, and those are things where I want to be more mindful of, not parsing a bunch of files we don't need. So absolutely, LOTRO Companion was kind enough to extract German and French versions of the data files. And I try not to bother them very often. So in the major versions, like 31, 32, I'll say, hey, would you mind generating those? And they go off and do that, and it's lovely. And then, again, I just have a tool that pulls in the English, the French, and the German, munges it together, and then splits it back out. Bez says those files are so disgustingly big. Yeah, it turns out there's a lot of text in this game. Absolutely. But they're all delivered with a plugin, but the goal is that the plugin only loads one of them, right? It only loads the deed info and deed names, IDs, and deed objectives. But these lookup tables in my head are better than some of the alternatives. You get some text in chat and you just go to the table and say, does this have an ID? If it does, great, we have a deed. Or possibly multiple deeds, or possibly deeds and quests. It's a bit of a mess. Okay, enough about that. We're talking about minstrels. So let's go ahead and unload and reload MinstrelBuff and see what happens. All right, we can see strings en.lua parsed, strings en.lua processed. Thurler, yeah. Beth says data's not that big. Anyway, UI objects are real offenders. Thirlor says, when the game client consumes several gigs of RAM, they aren't that big, relatively speaking. Absolutely. My game client can, I think, usually get up to, I'm just standing here in the 21st hall, and my graphics are apparently kind of low. Sorry about that. You're getting, what are you getting? I would say medium. All right, well, that's fine. We're not really looking at the game. Just sitting here in the 21st hall with graphics not particularly high. LOTRO is currently consuming about 2 gigs, just under that, 1990. Some of that's MinstrelBuffs, maybe. Well, I didn't reclaim that. Okay. So, 1990, if I load a deed tracker, will that make the memory usage spike? Yes. It took about 15 megs. 15 to 20 megs. That says, replies to Thorler, surprisingly, unloading a lot of UI is very heavy. It's the main reason why some plugins have such a long unload time where the client freezes. That's interesting. It is certainly true that something like D-Tracker does take a little while to unload. I just assumed it was because it was writing out a bunch of information. But yeah, that's maybe half a second of freezing. Okay, so we can see we are only processing the strings en file using this logic. You can do conditional imports in LOTRO Lua. I don't know if that's a thing in normal Lua. Probably is. Although the import keyword itself seems to not be a standard Lua keyword. It seems to be a variation on requires, but that's again where my Lua knowledge falls a little short. So if you're looking for that in standard Lua, I think it's requires. Or I have misunderstood something. That is quite possible. Okay, so let's go ahead and split some stuff out here. So what we're looking at is a lang structure that instead of having a bunch of variations, we're just going to have a single value instead of the table. So it would look more like this: window drag bar title equals Selbstgesproch tracker. That says, I think the most popular is probably combat analysis, but when I dug deep in my own plugin, I found that loading up 80 megabytes of options UI caused a 5 to 10 second freeze. Fascinating. Did you need 80 megabytes of UI? That's probably a deeper question. All right, soliloquy of spirit pattern. We know we want the English version, so we can come on in here and replace this table. Maybe not the whole table, because we do want those comments. So, oh, we didn't actually have any English comments. Awesome, I should probably get those. So the specialization changed, same thing. We're gonna come on in here, we're gonna go ahead and just use the final string value, none of the extra language stuff in there. Okay, same thing. And so like I said, once I have the sense of how I want this to work, just doing it a little bit manually here, I'm planning on going and developing a little C# utility that just goes through, looks for this kind of a table structure, and then just splits things out using the German or French value if it's there, otherwise the English value. I'm doing that manually right now just to get a sense of it. And I find that very useful if I'm thinking about automating a process, is to make sure I'm used to doing the process manually a little bit. Make sure I understand the things that work and the things that don't work, all that. Just trying to automate it before I really understand it just always ends me up having a lot of headache. Okay, here we can see one that didn't have any localizations anyway. Oh, serious business. I forgot to go get those after the last stream. But I think serious business is still applied in those festival areas, like the Breland Festival Grounds or the Festival Garden in Dooland. So I could go get the localization for serious business at my leisure. Okay, so we have gotten the wrong window title, but other than that, everything looks great. Let's go ahead and grab that correct window title. And all the rest of these look like English as well. So this would look like, or this is what our table would look like without any of the specialization for English, German, and French. More conversation. Thurlar says common analysis saves its settings on unload. That says I save a ton of data on unload, but the main contribution freezes tends to be the UI elements getting cleaned. That says it's also the reason why your game freezes on character selection after you log out of your character. That is the game unloading its own UI. One thing I am suspecting but have not been able to prove is that having a ton of UI will slow down your client somehow. Maybe it's not able to correctly handle a lot of UI objects. I don't know. So a thing, Baz, I would encourage you to try is when you start to log out of a character, it presents you'll be logged out in X number of seconds. And it seems like if you hit the log out now button, that timer still has to run out before you can get a proper character selection screen. It seems like if you just say log out, the 10 seconds expires, all else being equal, it feels like you get a snappier response at the character selection screen than if you hit log out and then immediately stab that log out now button. It feels like to me that there's still an underlying delay that prevents you from character swapping too quickly. And I can definitely see 15, 20 years ago when someone was making software developing decisions, one would say, hey, we do not want characters to bounce that quickly, so let's have this delay. So that makes sense to me, but it's only just a guess. I don't have a really firm numbers or knowledge about that. Okay, so we just did a basic conversion. Let's just do it again. Let's just do it again for German and see how that looks. So German, get rid of that, and now we have lang equals something. In those places where German is available, I'm going to go ahead and make use of it. In those places where it's not available, I'm going to use the English. Now, in those places where I had comments, I would like to keep those comments. And that might be a trickiness with the automatic parsing. I think comments might not get parsed in that way. And so that's something for me to think about. Okay. I messed up there. So let me go ahead and... There we go. Thurlar says, in their experience, the only bug with destroying UI is if you use the options panel in the plugin manager. That can definitely cause crashes on unloading the plugin. Interesting. I haven't had that experience myself, and I wonder if the crash is related to some sort of undefined behavior or incorrect parenting that normally wouldn't be noticeable, but because that's being hosted in the options panel. Thurlar says, I've successfully used the options panel on some plugins, but others, for example, reminders, I had to break it out into its own window. Yeah, speaking of things like the D-Tracker has, a not unreasonable number of options. I'll pull it up here while I'm musing. So, I mean, it's not a huge number, but I'd say a dozen or two options or things you can do, plus some extra debug stuff if the debug flag is enabled. And to my knowledge, it does not crash during unloading of the plugin. So that's really interesting that you've stumbled across that. I wonder what the cause is of that. Okay, and then we'll take the German version of that string and nix the rest. Great. Now, some of these strings are getting kind of long. That's unfortunate, and I'm just going to have to live with it. A thing that I'll sometimes do is indent the string to the next line. That saves you a good 10 to 15 indent characters. Some strings that gets it onto the screen. But a lot of times for a file like this, I'll just leave it. I'm not looking at this file very often. All right, let's go ahead and grab these string values as well. All right, here's one where we don't have the German value. So we're going to default to the English value because it's better to have something than nothing. Although for the serious business feature, that just means the feature won't work because it's depending on detecting a specific skill name. So that's not optimal, but it is what it is until you get the actual value. Okay, so that is a German lang structure. And just musing my way through here, we'll just do the French one real fast too. That says, I'm not a fan of using the options panel in the plugin manager. Anyway, it's such a small window. I prefer a separate options window pop out. Yeah, I can see that. I definitely have that constraint of this is like 200 pixels wide, but the options window can be resized. Like you definitely can make use of more space, but it feels kind of clunky to do it. Like if you have a lot of options, I think it's definitely worth. I think it might be worth both. You can always have the UI element that will be in your options window. You can also pass that off to the game and say, yeah, sure, go ahead and host it if someone's looking for options. But you can also do the thing I've seen in several plugins where they're like, to go to our options, click this button, and it just launches the normal options window. Thurlar says, Common Analysis manually destroys all of its UI elements recursively. Oh, that gives me feelings. Allowing the client to do it would probably be faster. The author may have been working on a crash point that existed long ago. So, I have a feeling Lord of the Rings Online itself does something similar. Like if I were to go to menu, exit game, the amount of time it takes to get to the desktop feels much longer than it should take to write out any plugin save files, the configuration file for the game itself, close any network handles, like the bare minimum of closing resources. It feels like there is memory destruction and returning to the OS that is happening that does not need to happen when the application itself is being torn down, right? And you can see a huge difference. Like if you're in game and you hit Alt F4, the time it takes for the window to close and go to the desktop is order of magnitude faster than the time it takes for the game itself to exit out to the desktop properly. And some of that is useful. Like you're not getting any plugin. I don't think you're getting any plugin save files if you hit Alt F4, although I haven't tested that. Yeah, the game probably has some comms cleanup between itself and the server to say, hey, I'm leaving, and so you don't go link lost, right? Like there's some actual work being done there. But objects destructing themselves and all that is probably happening and probably does not need to be happening. As a thought I had. But I get it. Like I have fallen down that rabbit hole where it's like, I don't want to have memory leaks in my program. And it's really easy to think, oh, all objects should destruct themselves all the time. Yes, unless your application itself is closing, in which case there's nothing to do. The OS is just going to reclaim that memory space. So you really just need to handle all the non-memory stuff that has side effects. But that's harder, right? It's easier just to have all your objects go through the destructors and not have to think about it. I'm speaking with an object-oriented language bias, but whatever your mechanism is for automatically cleaning up memory from allocations. Matt says, definitely recommend using Prettier with Prettier Lua in this case for formatting your code instead of doing it manually doing it. can make a .prettier RC to customize how it formats to your style. That's an interesting idea. I'm going to make a note to look at that later because I'm not ready to add another extension right now. And thanks for chiming in there, man. Check out Prettier Lua extension for Visual Studio Code. All right, I've got a note for later. Or would use that for other people's code, but not themselves. I hear you. So, yeah, with an RC file that controls what it thinks is pretty, I think I could handle it doing that. Yeah, absolutely. We definitely use some of the things on my team at work for C# for if we're not using the built-in stuff, then we can have a shared file for setting up what is white space, what is a tab, all those lovely things that you really want consistency on. Absolutely. Thriller says, if I make something ugly, there's a good reason for it. Fair enough. Fair enough. And there are definitely cases, right? And I think a lot of linter style or cleanup style things might have some way to mark, like, don't bother with this thing. Like if I'm doing like other white space lineup here where I want all these equals to be in the same line, some of them I've seen are really good about just saying, oh yeah, you're doing a thing here, I'm just not going to bother. But yeah, when you get into like Visual Studio's automatic stuff, it'll often be like, oh nope, that's extra spaces. We're not gonna allow that. This will not stand, which is frustrating. Actually, what really bothers me when I'm using Visual Studio for my day job is I'll open up a source file that's umpteen years old, right? I'm going to fix a bug in an old product, and yeah, everything's different, everything's weird, and I just want to paste a block in. It's like, okay, I've just pasted another block in. It's like, let me reformat the whole file for you. And it's like, no. Fortunately, there's a pretty good undo feature, but. So yes, aggressive formatting can get very irksome. But that's why we have source control. We can throw away all those needless white space changes. Okay, so just in the background here, while chattering away, I have gone ahead and split out those strings into separate files. So begin combination structure. Okay, and I don't know what to do about this, other than I want it deleted, certainly. But maybe not. Maybe we split it out and say strings combined.lua. And this is a file that's going to contain the source for those three split files. And what I've got here is I've got basically the input and output files that I want to see from this new utility that is currently only in my head, but I'm going to write. So I already have some test files of, if I take in this, I should get that. And I'll tweak both those input files and the code until I get something coherent. So maybe the comments won't make it in the output, but everything else will, right? So, and white space doesn't matter for this, except within strings. So as long as the table structures are the same, that's the important thing. Fairlore says sometimes aligned is better than pretty. Yeah, there can definitely be reasons for that. Okay, not to be the person who always goes back to their own project, but as an example, I was having a really annoying time with the massive amount of data in the D tracker. So here is an example of white space aligning things. Otherwise, this looks terrible, right? It's very difficult to tell what's going on, what's missing, what's not. Getting some white space in there. Here are some columns that are sometimes there, but not always there. Same thing with this one, but it just makes it so much easier to see what data is there, what data is different. So yes, absolutely. There are cases when white space really matters. I would hope a lot of markup, or a lot of linter style things would let you mark it up and say, like, you know, no fix or whatever, just to say, yeah, ignore this next block. Oh, interesting. Thurler says you need them aligned if you want to do block operations on them. That is beyond my experience. Thurler says you could make a base strings class with derived English, German, and French ones. I could. I want the files to never even be loaded. This is, again, with in mind for those multiple megabyte files under dtracker, or tens of megabytes if I ever get around to doing like a Quest version of that. Although I think Lunar Water is doing something, and I really hope to see what they're working on, because that looks exciting. But if I'm ever loading those files, I don't want the plugin to even see that those files exist. Oh, some more chat. TruePal says, wow, seems like so much extra work with other languages. So, yeah, there's a non-zero amount of extra work that you do if you want your plugin to be easily localizable, or I'm sorry, translatable to French or German, the other two officially supported Lord of the Rings Online languages. And these are all in, if you are looking at the client, there's a little box up here that says EN. If you click that, you'll notice the three languages, English, German, and French, are just part of the official distribution. And so if you are in the biz, as it were, you'll hear the terms internationalization and localization. And I tend to think of localization as the things you change about your code to allow for the different languages. Internationalization, and then localization is the actual, here are the different language terms. But yeah, there is more work. Now, this is overkill. What I'm doing right now is definitely overkill for this plugin, but I'm doing it in mind for more complicated plugins that I can apply this to, right? Ideally, we just have, ideally we never need this get string function again. We'll keep on working with that. So ideally, we have give the language, maybe have these little helpers so we don't have to keep looking at turbine.language.english, and then conditionally import the correct files. And eventually this could be 2, 3, 4 different files. In this plugin, it's going to be minstrel effects and strings, because both of those have localizable stuff. And that function, get strings, not going to be a problem. And then probably a single source file that you just run a little program on, and it splits it out into those 3 files. So, if you've got the German, great, you use the German, otherwise you use the English. So yeah, it is work. Once you have set it up, the actual code to do that, to use it, let's go to the settings. Let's see, get string. Do I have that? No. Playing. Get string. Where do I use that? Oh, there we go. So once you have it set up, the usage of those different languages is sometimes as simple as this. Get string, lang, window, drag bar title, and that gets the current string. Now I'm trying to streamline this, so all it will look like is just lang, window, drag bar title, and based on the language we'll have included the correct file, right? So the intent is that it takes a little bit more effort to set it up, but then you just use the string and you are getting the correct string. So yeah, I think it's worth the effort though, because there is, it feels like there's a large community of plugin developers and users for both French and German, definitely French, and excluding them just doesn't feel right to me. Like there's so many players out there that are getting so much enjoyment out of these plugins, and if it takes an extra hour or two to make your plugin multi-language friendly, I think that's worthwhile. Matt says, not to derail, but if you make a glob pattern to name your files, you could glob exclude ones you know you want to control that for local files, etc. Thurlar says, for the block editing, yes, where you alt select something vertically, edit them together. Yes, that is absolutely something I do in Sublime Text. I feel confident Visual Studio Code lets you do it as well. I just haven't figured out how. So in Sublime Text, if I hold down Control and Alt and then tab the down key, I'm moving my caret into a multi-select, and then absolutely, this makes it way easier to do edits. Now you can finagle things, like if you're just press the home key, you can use like control right and control left to kind of move through things that might have variable content, but you can see right there, half of them are in the IDs and half of them are past it, right? So having things vertically aligned like this, definitely useful. That being said, I don't manually edit these files. These files are generated from a different source because I have made some interesting choices in my past. Okay, let's go ahead and step on back. So we have a potential source file that we'll use to automatically generate the other things. Great, close that. We have the strings.lua, and we have the function, the getString function, that now we need to go and remove from the plugin. So serious business effect equals, this is no longer a thing. We're going to go ahead and kill that. It's just lang affects serious business, and we get what we get. Oh, Matt says, domain lookups.lua exclude star lookups.lua in.pretty ignore and to da. Okay, cool. Yeah. Definitely. I wonder if that extension allows finer grained control, but just being able to exclude a whole file is very useful if your whole file is nonsense like we were just looking at. Okay, so that was one of the get strings. Let's take a look at the next. And this is just really formulaic, right? Like we've removed the need to call this function, which I think is very nice. And again, with a mind towards more complicated plugins like dtracker, where there's 70 gajillion calls to get string, because it just kind of snowballed, right? Like it was just, oh, it's just the UI, and then it was everything, all the deed information, and it's going to be nicer. If anything, it's going to be nicer to look at, right? If name equals lang class soliloquy of spirit, that feels very verbose to me, very clear. Further says, now is a good time to use regex search and replace. Yeah. There's that old saying, it was actually originally about like sed or awk, I think, but you know, some people when they're faced with a problem think, oh, I know, I'll use regular expressions. Now they've got two problems. And that's not entirely fair, but yes, that is a thing that I could do. But since there were half a dozen of these changes, I don't mind just going through it. It's very satisfying just to manually get rid of them. Okay, so all the usages of a get string are done. In fact, if we say right-click and then go to references, we should get just itself, and we're done with it. That is gone. Now, one thing that I'm noting is client language. We're getting a suggestion that, hey, that's a global, it should be camel case, I assume. Should start with a capital letter. I haven't fixed that yet, but it keeps telling me. Philo says you have to use it on marginal cases for practice. Yes, that is true. I get nervous when I try to use regular expressions for anything because they have the potential to do a lot more than I mean them to. And source control makes a big difference. Okay, so that was the first thing, was getting rid of that particular structure. And we know we're done because every usage of the lang structure was wrapped in getString. It's actually kind of a nice feature of it. Yeah, a slight overhead of a function call, but you can find every place that was accessing the table. Now we'll just go for the lang access itself, which should be all of those same places. So let's take a moment and go back to our source control. So we have a to-do file. And what do we have? So the use language as, don't have separate tables for each language. Use a language as lookup or have a single pointer at the correct table. That's what we're doing. So let's go ahead and highlight this section. don't have separate tables for each language, and that is in MinstrelEffects.lua, and in strings.lua, don't use language as lookup in table. Awesome. And now we can take this more specific to-do item and say, cool, we actually just did that. So that's going to come in here, and that's going to be our commit message, our snapshot message. And let's see, what things are we going to use for that? Definitely not the CollectGarbage, but we have a removal of getString. Awesome. Some comments for later. Okay. More getString. We're going to stage that. We're going to stage that. We're not going to stage the debug options. And staging, partial staging of files is a really nice feature that's come about in more recent source control. Back in the day, this did not feel like, or, you know, when I first found it in Mercurial, it felt like magical. Like, oh, I don't have to just do the entire file. I don't know how far back this goes. Maybe more extensive source control had it way back earlier. But just being able to come back by here and say, nope, yep, for little bits and pieces, and not have to do the entire file as a whole chunk is very freeing for me. All right, so getString. All right, there's some other stuff here. Oh, that was a different thing. Okay, getString, awesome. And getString. Fantastic. I am out of water, but I've got another glass. Okay, our string.lua file itself just got a lot simpler, where instead of doing all of this, we're just importing a different file. And that original version is in strings combined, and then the German, English, and French. Although, I guess those should be committed. It's interesting. If those are going to be produced via a script from strings combined, there's an argument that says we don't need to commit them to source control, right? They should just be generated automatically. But I think it's fine for now. That way, if someone pulls down from source control and they don't have that other utility, they're not going to be stuck without a functioning plugin. Okay, so all of those changes are just the ones we specifically wanted to grab, and we can go ahead and take that snapshot. Now, what else is here? A couple of comments in main, debug options, and this was interesting. So this was a syntax issue that was found with, I think, the Lua extension that said, hey, the thing that you get from listbox get item is a control, and you're calling handle target changed on a control, and that's not a valid thing. And of course, underlying, we know that we are getting a soliloquy tracker row because that's the only thing we stick in there. And there's a couple different ways around it. We could subclass the list box, so it's a soliloquy tracker row list box or something. But in this case, I added a helper function, and I annotated that function to say it is returning a type of soliloquy tracker row. And that means the parser can now come through and say, oh, the thing that is coming back here is a soliloquy tracker row, and that has the function handle target changed, all is good. So, use helper function to retype control to soliloquy tracker row. Fun. And that's all that's happening here. Because the function itself is just doing the same thing, listbox get item. But because we've annotated the function to identify the type of that control as a more specific thing, that helps everything work. Okay. Now, I haven't actually tested this. testing it would be good. Let's go ahead and, open on up with the System Plugin Manager. We're going to go ahead and unload everything and then reload MinstrelBuff. And we'll just see, does it still work? Well, we haven't actually affected things over here too much. The Soliloquy Tracker UI we'll need to enable. Well, it sure... Oh, I'm not using the right thing. I'm just using Major Ballad, which is also very cool. Let me switch on over here. There we go. Okay. So we can see we're at least getting strings. Now we're not seeing other language strings. That's okay. Okay, so the next side of this, because when I was adding the Soliloquy Tracker window, I didn't want to muck with the Minstrel effects file more than I had to, so I just made a separate strings file. But the Minstrel effects also has a split between English, French, German, and here's where I would also want to do something similar. Where I would probably come into main and make sure that Minstrel effects happens after strings, and it does. And I would probably want to do the same thing. Now it's going to be tricky because it's going to be a lot more wide affecting because there wasn't a single function to access these things. But I think it'll be worth it. So we want to do this same structure here. I'm going to close settings and that. Okay, so ideally we would see something like this. MinstrelBuff window, and then we're importing Minstrel effects. So what does that look like? Yep. So Minstrel effects DE, Minstrel effects FR, Minstrel effects EN. And then we can split off these structures into separate files. So let's go ahead and pre-create those. We have FR and we have EN. Okay, so those are going to come on in from Minstrel Effects. Now the other thing is valid ballad effects EN, valid ballad effects FR, all that. I'm not. I want to combine those as well. But first things first, let's go ahead and move off the English versions into the English file. And if we wanted to, we could do the same thing where we say, hey, only process me if we're in the right language. So if we come on over to strings EN, same thing. If client language is not English, then no. Although in this case, we're looking for French. Oh, my mistake. That one was English. Okay, coming back here, we're gonna get the German version. Okay, so German effect names. Let's go ahead and pull that out. Awesome. And finally, French effect names. Now, this will have the additional tiny improvement in that all of these different strings are not going to be loaded into memory. All of these tables aren't going to be loaded into memory for the plugin. Now, there's not that much here. A kilobyte or two, maybe. That's all right. Got me curious. Thurlor has to do taxes. My goodness, it is that time of year, isn't it? Good luck. Okay, so if we're looking at plugins, MinstrelBuffs, we can take a look and see that these files are a couple of kilobytes, right? We're not saving a huge amount of memory, but it's a little bit. V says, hi there, and also, you may be confused. This is a stream about creating plugins for Lord of the Rings Online, which, as you see, I'm standing here in the 21st hall. But I'm also looking at the code for the MinstrelBuff plugin, where if you have played a minstrel in Lord of the Rings Online, you may recognize the need for tracking your ballads and your anthems, as this plugin is doing here. Or perhaps your soliloquist spirits, you want to get your inner strength. Is that what it's called? Yeah, your inner strength buffs up to tier 3, that kind of thing. So the MinstrelBuff plugin is what we're looking at today. And under the covers, it has support for French, German, and English, and that's what we're looking at. Oh, hey, he is a programmer. Awesome. We're using the Lua scripting language, and today I'm looking at ways to make things better. The way this was first set up, or at least was set up by the previous maintainer, was that there were parallel structures: valid ballad effects English, valid ballad effects French, valid ballad effects German, for instance. But for our purposes, that just doesn't make a lot of sense. You can only ever have one client language, and you have to completely exit the game and come back in to change your client language. So whatever it is when you log in, that is guaranteed to be your client language until some massive change of the game in the future. And we'll deal with that then. Okay, so with that being said, what I want to do is go through and first check if this change is okay, because if it is, we can commit this change. So we'll come on in here to the plugin manager, unload the MinstrelBuff, load the MinstrelBuff, and do some basic stuff and make sure everything looks like it's still there. Awesome. It's all still there. So that means we can come back into our source control utility. And all right, those are still comments. We don't need to go ahead and commit those. V says, why are we doing this? That's an excellent question. 2 reasons. One, there's an inner loop in this plugin where, if you're familiar with Lord of the Rings Online, we have requested the game call a function every time an effect is added to, removed from, or changed in this list. And in combat, your effects list can change quite rapidly with effects coming on and coming off. Heals being procced by other people. It's changing all the time. And so I have a mind to look at what's happening in that function and simplify it as much as possible. And one of the things that happens in that function is we... let me actually pull it back up. It is exciting. In our refresh effect display, and this is called each time something's added, removed, or changed, we go through each of the effects, we copy it off, and then we sort all of those effects by how much time they have left, or how long they've been active. And then we go through that sort of list of effects and see if we are interested in it. And if we are, we'll do something with it. And for each one of those, we call a function like isValidBalladEffect with a string. And in that function, we say, if the localization is French, then we go to the French table. And if it's German, we go to the German table. And if it's English, we go to the English table. And for each of these get localization calls, we're calling a different get effect localization names, which looks at a variable which used to be calculated every time this function was called. Last time we went ahead and saved off that result once because, again, it can't change. And now we just return that result. But that was a thing that was happening. Is this function would be called, and then all of this would be run. And if you were in the English client, that meant every time we were checking an anthem or a ballad, we would recheck, are we German, French? No? Okay, English. German, French, English. Okay. So it felt like that was a lot of unnecessary work. I don't know how much under the cover just-in-time optimization the intermediate language does when you load the Lua and it compiles into a bytecode language, but that's a lot of extra work. that doesn't feel useful. So going back to the main, we're doing that with, oops, let's see, where were we? We were doing that with isValidAnthem effect and also let's see, is valid ballot effect. So, and we were doing that for each effect. Yeah, it was a lot of work. So my goal is to practice doing this kind of careful reduction of effort here so that I can take it into a different, more complicated plugin in the future and maybe get some meaningful gains there as well. So this is practice, but I also use this plugin every time I play because I almost always am playing a Minstrel. And so anything that makes this plugin just a little bit nicer, it takes a little bit less time to do its thing, that's an improvement for me myself. So that's where we are at there. Okay, so we have functions. Is valid ballot effect. That's a reasonable function. But these lookups for these tables, that is not. And so what we want to do is instead of doing valid ballot effects en, we just want to have valid ballot effects. Oops. Valid anthem effects. Valid coda skill names. Cry skill names. We're going to remove that en suffix from each of those table names, and we're going to do it in the French and the German as well. So depending on which language you're running on, you're going to get your own set of tables, and you're not going to even see the others existing, and that's fine. So that's English, French is done. Let's come on over to the German and do the same thing. And yes, if I was feeling a little bit more complicated, I could go ahead and select DE and replace that with not DE. Really? What do we got here? Don't use regular expressions. Oh, okay. I'm not used to Visual Studio Code's way of doing the replacement. That's okay. Okay, so each one of German, English, and French are just populating the same named tables. And so now we need to go through, and in the code, any place that was referring to those three distinct tables, we want to go ahead and refactor that so it doesn't do that anymore. So for instance, is valid ballot effect, now instead of doing this multi-check, is just return valid ballot effect. Effect name does not equal nil. Super easy. If I wrote it correctly. Oh, it's complaining because it thinks we're done here. And it's going to be the same thing for each of these. Instead of this branching structure, we're going to just say return valid anthem effects. Effect name does not equal nil, and get rid of the rest of this. And we've actually, for the English client, have gotten rid of 2 calls to get localization, which is, I think, 2 different function dispatches to return a class variable. And so that would be a little micro optimization, right? Is to cache the result of get localization that we're just going to use in the next one. But instead, we just don't need it. It's gone. Bam. In fact, I should be coming through and walking through each of these structures here. So valid anthem effects. Oh, interesting. I wasn't paying attention. Okay, so is valid anthem effect, and then get anthem effect position. Okay, what does that look like? Okay, getting the actual number. Cool. So return, let me do it at the end here. Return valid anthem effects effect name. Now that the function is this simple, there's a reasonable question to be asked. Whoa. Sorry, I was hitting the wrong key there. I wonder if there's a way to make that undo. Appearance. Reset. Great. There's a question to be asked of, do we even need a helper function for this? Could we just swap in this and avoid the overhead of a single function call? Just in case the Lua code does not optimize this call out completely. I'm not ready for that yet. But this is definitely putting us in the position of maybe we don't even need these functions at all. All right, is valid code a skill? From that, we're getting a skill. That's fascinating. Why? Why are we getting that? Oh, interesting. So we're getting, that's completely different. All right. Well, we did valid ballad effects. We did valid anthem effects, I think. Let's go ahead and double check that. Great. We just have the ones we want. Valid coda skill names. Let's go ahead for that. So for these, we just want return valid coda skill names. Skill name does not equal nil. And the rest of this can just go away. Okay. Awesome. How do I get rid of that search? Clear search results. Oh, nice. Okay. I'm still learning how to use Visual Studio Code. It is just a little bit different from Visual Studio. Okay, so we have is valid coda skill. From that, we get a skill info, and then from that, we get a skill name, and from that, we check. Now, could that be better optimized? Maybe, but it actually doesn't matter because this is something that only runs very irregularly. If you are not familiar with it, the show window and hide windows functions set up a bunch of callbacks to know about things. And those are called irregularly. When the plugin starts up, when you manually enable it and disable it, it's not a thing that happens during this inner loop. So it doesn't matter, and we're going to move on. So valid coda skill names. Great, we're all done there. Collapse it down. I'm just collapsing things down because it makes it easy to track what we have and have not done. All right, valid cry skill names. So same thing actually. Return valid cry skill names. Skill name does not equal nil. Is it present? And get rid of the rest of it. Awesome. It's very satisfying to just be able to delete code. Okay, valid major ballad skill names. Let's see where that's being used. Awesome. Looks very similar. And we're going to do the same thing. Return valid major ballad skill names. Skill name does not equal nil. Get rid of all that. Lovely. Now, you might ask, these functions look really similar. Do we really need all of these different things? And the answer is, maybe not. You could actually extract this out to a single function that takes a name and a table and does this, or a skill and a table and does this. But I don't feel like we need to do that. Again, these aren't happening very often. So it would be fine either way. All right, valid yellow trait skill names. What a fascinating difference. They didn't bother to make a function for it. Is in yellow spec. Right? Like, it feels like if we're going to have all these functions, we should at least be consistent about it. All right, so we have skill name. Skill name comes from skill info. Skill info comes from skill. All right, let's be consistent about this. So we have some functions that are taking skills somewhere. Maybe they're up above. Oh no, this is buff window. Oh, that's exciting. All right, so let's go ahead and make a new function. Function MinstrelBuff main is valid yellow trait skill. Sure, it's clunky, but gets the point across. And in this function, we want to do some of those same things, probably. But let's come on out here. We have skill info, we have skill name. Those look great. And then we have this block. So this is what would have been here if they had been consistent and included that. And that's fine. Okay, so instead of all that, if we do a we can just do return valid yellow trait skill names of skill name does not equal nil. And I feel pretty good about that because what we're looking at is if it's French, then use the French, and the French is true. If it's yeah, they really could have just if it's French, then and then just return this, and that would have made it more identical to what we were currently seeing. And so yeah, I feel good about that transformation. I wonder why they're looking at yellow trait. Oh well. And so here we can look at this and say local is yellow equals is valid yellow trait skill. But why are they doing this? Is in yellow spec. Interesting. Anthem of prowess. Sure, yeah. Skill. Oh, we do need to grab skill. Oh. And then, oh no, if is valid yellow skill, then return true. That's all we need. And then that eliminates the need for all of this here. Awesome. Undefined global, you're absolutely right. That is undefined. Do we have access to main from here? MB main. There we go. So that error that it was pointing out, we can go ahead and use MB main is valid yellow trait skill. Now, I am very curious where this is in yellow spec coming, in the background from stance. Okay, where's that? What's that happening? Okay, that's happening from, oh my goodness, we're doing that. Okay, just during the start. Phew, okay. I don't play a lot of yellow line minstrel, so I don't actually know what that's trying to do. I only really play yellow line minstrel when I'm trying to finish the minstrel class deeds. There's one or two of them that's you kind of need to be in yellow for. Okay. Oh, that's so fun. Get class, or class attributes should be, no, it's not. That should be a, get class attributes should be a class attributes. And get stance, oh, because it's not necessarily a minstrel. Yeah, okay. That could be a problem if you load this up with a non-minstrel. So that's a problem for a future. Okay, we have gone through the entire Minstrel Effects English version, and assuming that the German and French versions had those same 6 tables, then we are done. But the real test is, does it work? So we're going to go ahead and unload the plugin, reload the plugin, and then try a couple things.
Awesome. All right, everything continues to seem to work. Now, I'm not going to see any specific performance increases from this. What we're talking about is saving a few processor cycles. But in combat, that could add up to something noticeable, and what we have definitely done is made this easier. So these functions are now much easier. The redhead says, Dutch, Deutsch, potato, tomato. Yeah, sorry for German people, but my mind goes to Dutch way faster. Okay, so from a maintainability perspective, we do have the problem that the minstrel effects, German, English, and French, are now not co-located. But they weren't really co-located either. There were different chunks that made it a little bit hard to see what was what. And so we could do something similar where we tried to have a single file that contains them all and split it out. But these things change so irregularly. Unlike a user interface, these will only change if the design of the plugin changes or if LOTRO itself changes in some way. And maybe Minstrels will be revamped someday, and this will need an overhaul. But these are not like I'm going to add another option to the UI kind of changes. These are massive changes, or fundamental changes, I should say. Okay, so we have a hopefully better language system. We only load the language stuff that we need, and that makes looking up very simple because we just look at the table and find out if the thing is there. I like that. Now, as we said, we now have that question of, does it make sense to call isValidValidEffect instead of just looking at the table? I'm not sure, but a single function dispatch I'm a lot less concerned of than all of that extra looking. Now, another micro optimization I'm seeing here is we're calling effect getName a lot. And since we're always calling it, okay, we're not always calling it, but since we're frequently calling it, it feels like we could call, assign that to a local variable instead of asking for it each time. Again, that's a sort of maybe a micro optimization, but it also would make the code feel cleaner to me. So we could do let's take a snapshot first, and then we'll get back to that. Oh, in our to-do file, we said don't have separate tables for each. Well, I tried to spell language. There we go. That's what happens when I type while I'm talking. Let's go ahead and take a snapshot. We have done just that. Minstrel effects Lua don't have separate tables for each language. What does that look like? In buff window, we can see how much simpler this got. In main, we have we just cleaned up a trailing space there. I'm not going to maintain that. Here we can see each of these functions and gets much simpler. And we went ahead and added a new valid yellow line function. All right, Minstrel Effects itself has become just the conditional importation of the correct file. And those files are just copy-pasted with changed array names. Just checking that those array names did get changed. Now, a proper test will include switching over German and French and making sure things do still work there. But it takes a bit of a time because you do have to exit out to desktop and then relaunch. So that's going to happen off stream or next week. All right, don't have separate tables for each language. Commit. All right, we have our snapshot. Okay, we'll minimize that. All right, what do we have with strings? We're done with strings. Okay. So what I was just mentioning, we could go ahead and say local effect name equals effect get name. and then just use that in place of each of these effect get names. That feels like a reasonable thing to do. Okay, how do I find the next? Okay. Sure. So that's a small thing. For me, that's a readability thing. That's not really a performance thing. Ideally, the language itself or the interpreter would take care of that kind of a check. Where it says, oh, you're calling the same thing over and over. But if it's hard for it to determine that can't change between invocations, then, yeah. It may just say, no, that's too hard to test. It could change. I don't know. I'm going to call it each time. And so just call it once. Use that same thing over and over. That sounds great. Hopefully that makes it a little bit easier to read this as well. Okay, that seems like a nice small change. In fact, was that even in my to-do file? Oh, and you know, we have a README file. We could make some notes. Made changes for easier maintenance and possibly possible speed improvements. We'll just make a note there. That's vague enough. It's fine. Okay. Yes. Farathan says, I would like to test those changes too. Yes, I am interested in getting to a place where I'm done making big changes like this, and then we'll just release the next version, and then we'll see what happens. But my goal is to go ahead and... Oh, that's funny. My goal is to go ahead and test them locally myself, just to make sure it looks like it's working on French and German, so that we don't have a waste of time in testing. All right, so we're going to go ahead and stage this effect name change. It's a small one, but why not? Did I even mention that in my goals? Let's take a look. Nope. Okay. So, save off effect name. Instead of calling it numerous times, depending on the logic. Okay. Now, some of the things that we came across are bigger changes that I think we'll probably save until next time. We have some big ideas, and actually that's sort of the biggest remaining one, is in this function. As mentioned, we take the effect list, and this is every time an effect is added, removed, or changed. We take that list, we copy off every item of that list, and then we sort it, and then we check to see if we needed to have sorted it, and then for each in the sorted list, we check to see if we care about it. And that feels like some wasted effort. It feels like a lot of the effects in that list we don't care about. For instance, maybe we could check to see if something is a valid effect earlier. Maybe, I feel like only the things that matter should go into sorted effects, and then we should only sort it if we're not doing fixed anthems. How much of that can we do here, and how likely are we to mess something up? Well, first of all, let's get rid of this comment, and let's sort of separate out the logic here a little bit. Give us some vertical white space so we can read this a little bit better. Okay. If is anthem fixed is true, then do something. else, let's go ahead and sort that table. I don't feel like we need to sort the table if we're in fixed mode. That doesn't seem necessary. Now, I could be mistaken about that. Let's go ahead and reload, and let's be in fixed mode and see what happens. Okay. And I'm going to re-up the Anthem of the Third Age, so its timer is obviously different. Okay, and then we'll switch back to fixed and see what's going on here. Okay, none of that seems like a problem to me. Okay, so I think that is just a nicety, right? Obviously, if the anthems are fixed, we do not need to have chronologically sorted effects. Great. The second thing that I think is worth doing, and I've collapsed down some serious business stuff. I don't think that's going to come into play here. Okay, what is going on here? If ballot effect place is less than 3 and self is ballot effect, and we're not ignoring effects, and that was something I left in after doing some testing. We can pretend that's always going to not come into play. Self, buff window, show effect, effects, and ballot effect place. Now this is interesting. This is kind of a chronological thing, because ballots come in and go out in a first in, first out order. So if I were in combat and I did a minor ballot, that would move one slot over, and that is an appropriate thing to do. So sorting is good there, which, interesting. So this is only correct, and only a correct change for anthems, not for ballads. All right, so we're going to undo the thing that I did right there. All right. Else, anthems should be sorted. Okay. Now, we have a sorted effects here. Why do we have a single array that we then need to go through again to determine if it's a ballot effect? Like, why is this logic not there? I'm not sure. At the risk of complicating things, I really feel like the first time we're looking at each effect, we should do this logic here, place them into an appropriate array, and then sort them if we need to. Also, I really hate that we're managing the position in the buff window for each effect. I'm really not a fan of that. The fact that all that is happening here, instead of telling the buff window, hey, we're going to start doing stuff. Okay, we've stopped doing stuff. Draw yourself, or something like that. Or even just having the buff window do this logic itself. All of this is buff window, buff window, buff window. And yeah, I am really feeling like this does not need to be in main. Refresh effect display should just tell buff window, hey, you do that. So let's make that a to-do item. Main refresh effect display. And it's actually MinstrelBuff main. Should, let's see, logic should be moved into buff window, because nothing here does anything except buff window, I think. Well, we do have D as serious business. Where does that happen? Yeah, no, that's all buff window also. We're doing so much stuff here that buff window should be in charge of. buff window, hide anthem. Like that is, yeah, this can be better. Okay, and ballads should always be sorted. Okay. So I think that was this as well. Okay. Logic fixes. Have two tables. Anthem effects and ballad effects. And then always sort ballad effects, sort anthem effects, if not fixed anthems. Cool. Now, I assume the sorting of the effects was necessary at one time. It may currently be necessary. I don't know what order those effects come in at. But part of me wonders if they don't come in the chronological order anyway. But we'll assume that sorting is needed. And also, if they're already in the correct order, a good sorting algorithm is going to be order 1, or order n, where it checks each one and we're done. And order n for a sorting algorithm is not terrible, especially when we're talking 3 items, 4 items. So I'm not concerned about keeping the sorting there right now. Though it would be nice if it were not necessary. Okay, what else am I seeing when I'm looking at this? Yeah, so move logic. Checking is valid, is valid anthem, and so forth into initial loop. Only save off effects that matter. Or don't save them off at all, see above. Again, we don't need to copy things off. The whole reason that we're saving off the effects is, and to do this a full against this brethren, absolutely. The only reason this loop is saving off the effects is so that then, this loop. This loop is saving off the effects so that we can then apply a naive table.sort to this based off of the time. But we don't actually need that. We just need to know which indices we're using. So if we had a table of indices, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, we could sort them based off of the time of the thing in effect list. We don't need to do this copy thing. Now, maybe this is a copy on write kind of thing. Maybe this is a really cheap copy. But even so, that says it just does not make sense to look at the entire list of effects when you can look at the specific effect that is added using the effect list events. Yeah, that is another thing. Actually, let me add that to the list. Break logic out into, and what are we calling this? Effect added into separate functions for effect added, effect removed, and effect cleared. And I don't even know the difference between those. Okay, and that's all that we're doing. And each one of those is going to the singular refresh effect display, and it drops those arguments completely. Absolutely. So, break logic out in separate function for these, or pay attention to the past arguments and do something sensible. Yeah, absolutely. Rescanning the entire effects list, even if that's useful. And I would say maybe it's useful if the functions themselves are maybe called inconsistently, or something's removed and then added, or out of order. If these calls are not always precisely correct, I could see the use in just saying, whatever, any of these calls, we're going to redo it. But even so, we should not do unnecessary work while we're doing the unnecessary work. It's just extra work. Okay, and yes, we have a full to-do list of ideas of ways to, even if it doesn't actually improve performance, it should definitely improve the readability of the code. Okay, well, we are coming up on the end of the time here. So if you have any last minutes, comments, questions, whatnot, throw them in the chat here. I'm going to drink this water and read what's coming in. Oh, Fairthan asks, hey, are you going to compare times? That's a good idea. Let's go ahead and do it. We still have... Do I still have? Where did I put them? Oh, that's the wrong function, of course. Okay, we still have this memory used. I don't expect a lot of difference here for the memory collect garbage value, but I am curious. Thank you for reminding me there, Fairthan. I'm going to go ahead and unload and then reload, and then let's take a look. Okay, we can see we started in the 1186 range. Oh, I find that really interesting, actually, because we did not load all of those strings. We are actually a few, K lighter than we were. If I were doing something really fancy, I would save off a minimum and maximum for, I would save off minimum and maximum of these values. I'm just doing this kind of by eye, where I see, okay, we started at 186 maybe, we pop up all the way to 1200, then we drop back down. I would say it looks like we're skirting between 1190 and 1200. Okay, that's pretty reasonable. So we can actually come back in here. Thank you very much for that reminder. That's excellent. End of stream 2022-04-12. In fact, let's call this out. Okay, so we can see not loading all those language strings, say like 30 kilobytes. In the grand scheme of things, that's not tremendous, but it is noticeable, and that's cool. Because one less thing your computer has to worry about paging in and out. And what's funny is your plugin would always be accessing those memories because we would always be checking the French and then the German and then the English. Would we? Oh, no, sorry. We wouldn't actually be checking the tables. So I guess those could get paged out if they were laid out in memory appropriately. That'd be cool. But in the meantime, cool. The number's gone down. That's pretty neat. Thanks for the reminder. Baz says, performance gains should be huge if you use this plugin in raid situations. Yeah, that was a thing that I noticed, was when I was helping out in runs for Narahel Tier 3 on Treebeard, so cap level 60, in the Red Maid Boss from the Vaults in the Spring Festival. There was a thing that happened, and I was never quite sure what it was, but it seemed related to the ads starting to move or when they died or something, right? Like a thing happened and my client just sort of paused for a moment, and I don't know if it was specifically this plugin, but something happened. My client froze for a moment. It's like, this is the exact time when I would like my client not to be frozen because I need to be healing people because something just happened. And so if this just if these changes help just a little bit with that that freezing when a bunch of effects are changing at the same time, which is what I assume was happening, I'll be very happy with that. I don't know how this will work in a raid situation. I don't know if raiders actually use the MinstrelBuffs plugin, but it has a lot of downloads over the 10 years it's been up, so maybe. Farrelton says, thanks for your work. I hope to see an update on LOTRO interface. Yeah, I have a desire and I didn't get to it at all today. I have a desire for this minimal version of the UI that I really like, the Windows Standard, that if you get a 4th or a 5th anthem applied to you, that it just gets a little bit wider to support that. And then when those anthems go away, it just gets smaller again. So it's a minimum of 3, but it could be variable size. Because right now, if you get a 4th anthem, it just sticks off the edge here and it looks terrible. And if you get a 5th one, you just don't, maybe you see it, but you definitely don't see the timer bar. And so I think that would be a neat change, but I think that's more than I'm going to get to in this current one. So I'll probably release what we've got so far as an update, and you'll be able to play around with that. And there's also the question of how long do I keep doing patches versus just sort of take over and do like a MinstrelBuffs 2 or something. But that's a question for another time. The patches seem to work. Oh. Fairthon says, oh yes, but take your time. The translation /hyphen fix was more important. Well, I'm glad we got that sorted out. I think that was just a question of me not testing enough. And what I should do, and I think about this and then I don't do it, but I would recommend, if you have a plugin like this, just write up a set of like 10 things. In fact, hang on. What am I even not writing this down for? Okay. Create test procedures to walk through the possible logic in English, French, and German. Because this would be very handy, is just have a list of here's the 17 things I need to do, and I don't need to do anything more than that. Everything more is just, yay, it works even better. And just keep that up to date. Just have a file, how to test, and just every time you add new procedures, try to remember to go back and update that so it's reasonably up to date. So that's a thing that should be a part of a plugin, I think, and I keep not doing it. So it's a place for me to get better in the future. Okay, well, that seems to be all the questions that have rolled into chat. So, if there's something you needed to get out right now, throw it out there. Otherwise, let's see, what do we have here? It is not the last Tuesday of the month, so I think this is the last official stream of the day. Yeah, okay, so, howdy. Yes, Stroll the Skies will be back in 2 weeks, I believe. So, next one is Winnie. Awesome. And or Valoran. Okay, so that is all we're going to cover today. Thank you so much for joining me on this exploration of LOTRO plugins. I do hope to see you again next week, and until then, keep plugging along. All right, bye-bye now.